Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
Along with Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur for another edition of Protected Speech. We're going to get into a new debate that has been going on, but this one's the first time it's affecting the Ivy League, and that's Brown University. They announced that they're adding caste to their non-discrimination policy. Now, we've seen this policy spread across the country. The California university system a few months ago added this policy. We've had a number of other schools around the country. And of course, we've had a number of cities and counties apply caste now to some of their metrics as well. So, Jonathan, we've been covering caste as a story for a couple of years. I know in Santa Clara County, there was a topic that went wild about adding caste throughout Santa Clara County, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of Indian American employees.
Audience, caste, it's a word you don't really hear. The mainstream American audience doesn't really hear caste, right? What is caste? It has to do with class, essentially, right?
Well, again, caste is a Portuguese word, but it has been applied to Hinduism primarily, but all the South Asian nations and all the cultures, all the faiths have had some kind of construct. But the argument that's being applied here in the United States is that caste has come to the U.S. And so with more and more South Asian,
where you have the high class, middle class, lower class, right? I mean, that's essentially what the system is that these American colleges, these cities do not want as a part of their system, allegedly, right?
Well, again, it's hard to simplify it, and because caste is so complicated as it is, and that's the challenge, right? That's the people who are upset about having such a blanket term is what is leading to litigation. So, California, Cal State University system put it in place. Now they're getting sued by professors within that system, saying, "Hey, this is not an equal playing ground for everybody." Because once you start saying that brown people are applying caste to one another, it could really throw things off. So they think it's actually discriminatory towards South Asians. So we'll see how this debate goes. But Brown is yet another university that's applying it because of political pressure from activists who are working within the system to get these folks to stand on the dotted line here.
Discussed in the mainstream media as much. You may be hearing it in local media, but I mean, people even listening to us, I think they're like, "What? Is this really going on?" I mean, how did we even get to this point? How is this quietly happening at these academic institutions and at the cities?
Well, there's a concerted effort, right? We've talked about some of the groups that are out there trying to push things forward. Equality Labs being one of them. They're a Dalit rights activist group, and some of the principles behind there have gone to places like Alameda County, have gone to the city and county of San Francisco, gone to Seattle,
So
Chicago.
what are these principles you're talking about? What are these principles?
Well, again, Equality Labs. The main person at Equality Labs is a lady named Tenmozi Sundararajan. We've covered her. We've interviewed her over the years. She's been very outspoken about stating that, in a sense, caste is everywhere in the United States, especially amongst South Asian Americans. And she has argued successfully to cities, counties, and now universities, and even Silicon Valley workplaces, that this is a prevalent situation. Of course, the real issue is, we're talking South Asians broadly, or maybe at max, say 2 to 3% of the U.S. Indian Americans are about 1.5%. So they're claiming this is a really widespread situation, but we're talking about a micro minority, and they're saying within this micro minority subset, there's great discrimination. In the Cal State
minority happens to be the fastest growing group within Asian Americans. Most affluent, most highly educated, and they're in these academic institutions. They're now in these places of power. So it's significant, essentially, for our audience who have no idea what's going on with this debate. I mean, it's significant because what's being implied here is that Indian, Pakistani, other South Asian culture is now being brought here to the States and applied even within the subculture. Isn't that right?
That's the argument that's being made. And again, most of the Indian Americans came, the first crop really came in the 60s and 70s. You had a newer crop in the 90s and the 2000s. And they're saying some of these folks have brought some of these dynamics from South Asia to America, and they are discriminating against folks here. And so thus you have
here's
folks
what I haven't seen. I've been covering this as well with you, but where's the proof at the end of the day? It becomes up to interpretation. It becomes he said, she said. Yet, how did it become policy? Where's the proof? Where's the evidence of this actually happening? I understand that, there's a lawsuit right now in the tech world as well. At Cisco, I believe there's an engineer who sued the company and some of his Indian colleagues for alleged caste discrimination as well. He alleged that they were looking down at him, and because of that, they consider him to be a part of a lower caste, so he couldn't get that promotion like his other colleagues. I don't know, man. It seems like this type of stuff is happening not just in these South Asian nations, but when it comes to caste or class, it's happening in the U.S. as well.
Well, again, it gets convoluted, right? There are thousands of castes, and then exactly how do you differentiate what caste discrimination is versus just regular old discrimination? Let's face it, we don't just hang out with everybody that we associate with, right? People come and meet you. You have a connection. You may become friends. You're not going to be friends with everybody. And so I think the challenge you have here is that you have people who are talking about very specific circumstances that happen to them, and they could have been discriminated against. But is caste so pervasive in the United States it merits law? Because keep in mind, some of the arguments like the Hindu American Foundation have said, hey, we already have laws on the books against discrimination. There's already broad-based law helping folks get through situations like this. Why are we pointing out effectively at a group, South Asians, but more specifically Indians or even Hindu Americans? Their argument is that this is being targeted by groups that are trying to, in a sense, dismantle Hinduism or Hindutva.
Man, as an outsider listening to this just sounds crazy. I mean, there's so many things going on in this world, and then to hear about this, and I think that's also part of the problem here, right? So many people don't even know this is happening. It's happening quietly, it's happening systematically, and folks are not necessarily raising red flags. They're kind of going along with it. I think it's almost part of this woke movement that we're seeing in the past 2-3 years, because I don't think the timing's a coincidence. When did this all begin? When did these, this caste policy / laws, when did all of this start happening? It sounds like it happened just in the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, if you want to listen, if you want to get the full context, and again, we're going back and forth, but Rajiv Malhotra, he's an academic, he's an author and someone who's been kind of fighting these battles, especially in the academic arenas. He had a 1-hour conversation with me recently and broke this down. And a lot of this got started at Harvard University and now has spread to other academic institutions. And, again, South Asian studies.
Ivy Leagues, it's Harvard now as well.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, Harvard is one of the universities that has been at the forefront of this. So, yeah, but Brown's actually put it, they're the first Ivy to make it like broad-based as part of like university policy. So it's a little bit different than what Harvard did. And so that's what I'm saying. This is a change. And once again, another kind of check mark here for the folks that want to apply caste to all non-discrimination policies and really have a separate category.
I want to know the evidence. Where's the evidence? Right now, it just seems like allegations. He said, she said, yet the universities, they're like taking these preemptive measures. Is there real evidence? Because again, it seems like in many cases, it's preemptive stuff, right?
Well, again, what's interesting at the CSU situation, which is also being litigated, the Cal State University professors say not one case came forward of someone complaining of being discriminated against by their caste. Now, the counter argument is like, oh, there was no caste non-discrimination policy in place. But the reality is we don't know for sure what the data is because no data has been presented.
And like the Hindu American Foundation has said, they're already, at least in America, anti-discrimination laws already on the book. So again, the argument is, why do you need this for this very specific subculture or group of folks? I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, again, this is an ongoing debate. Why we brought it up today, because it's something we've been covering for years on end now, and it's going to continue. Let's go forward to another thing we've been covering extensively, more than, frankly, we wanted to, and that's Twitter. And the reason we're bringing up Twitter once again is that this revelation that just broke, that Elon Musk said that he is going to disclose the folks that were shadow banned. He's actually going to give them data. If your username was shadow banned by the previous Twitter regime, you're going to know that, which is just stunning for those of us who feel like, wait a second, why aren't my Twitter followers growing? I know we've all had situations where we think, wow, we should get more followers and what have you. And I know, Jonathan, you've exploded on Twitter over the last year. I'm sure you have thoughts about this.
All right. Well, look, I was going to read something. That's why I was looking down at my phone. Look, let's not assume our audience always knows what the heck we're talking about, right? So shadow banning, that's at least we know what it is, but from a social media site or online forum standpoint, it's when users, without their knowledge, typically are not aware that their posts or comments are no longer visible to other users, right? So Diya TV, for example, I don't know how many followers you have. I think you should have probably more than 10,000, but you're under 10,000 right now. But there's a chance you may have been shadow banned. In other words, some higher ups at Twitter before Musk, this is pre Elon Musk, didn't like your agenda and they may have prevented others from seeing all your content. That's shadow banning, right?
Well, I think agenda is an interesting word to use. I certainly don't think we have an agenda. We just want to talk about what's going on for this diaspora and give
Well,
straight
others
news.
interpret
But
that as agenda. So I understand what your motive is. But yeah, I think
right.
that's the problem, right? People, if they disagree with you now these days, they'll accuse you of having an agenda, a left, a right, or whatever. So anyway.
I think in the news context, I think if you align with some of these folks, again, the previous Twitter regime, they've had this disclosure about political donations. Overwhelmingly, 98, 99% of political donations from former Twitter employees went to Democratic leaning causes. So that definitely will shape the politics of Twitter. And certainly we had a lot of folks on the right that were banned. And certainly Donald Trump, the former president, was banned while he was in office, which is still pretty remarkable, all things considered. But this is
So
where.
why is shadow banning back in the news now? This Indian professor or
Well,
doctor?
I mean, the big thing is obviously we have this huge COVID debate, and we saw all the information about COVID. Dr. Fauci saying we all need to get vaccinated, and so many of us took the government at their word. But obviously, there were skeptics, and the skeptics were the ones that were being challenged in every forum. And there's an Indian American doctor at Stanford, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who has just found out that he was shadow banned. And he's a very credible figure, a guy that has a litany of success in his professional career. Obviously, you don't get to Stanford without being someone highly accredited, but he was challenging the government's protocol and really the way medical practitioners were going about COVID. And he wanted to put it out there in the world. And apparently now he's learned that he was shadow banned. And so I think this is a fascinating turn of events to see how many other folks were affected.
What I don't understand about this whole shadow banning thing, again, the social media platforms play a significant role in discourse now. But if you think about academia, it's a place where different ideas and perspectives, especially in the medical field, I always thought that different ideas and perspectives were welcome. I understand we don't want fake news. I understand we don't want any wild, far left or far right conspiracy theories or QAnon stuff. But to question the approach or the efficacy of the COVID-19 pandemic response, again, I think in any other context that would have been welcome. But here, under these circumstances, if we disagree with the government's take or some of their doctors, I don't know. That's not how medicine works, right?
Well, look, I think we've seen evolution scientifically over the years. Things that we thought would have worked X amount of years ago was proven to be, something that was fallacious. I mean, people thought smoking was good for you, decades ago. Obviously,
exactly. There's no 10-year FDA study on this COVID-19, vaccine, right?
I mean, look, Jonathan, you and I both know how the news process works. I have gone into newsrooms and they run a story on, say, coffee, saying, "Hey, drink a cup of coffee a day and you'll be super healthy," right? Right? I mean, you name the topic, and there's some product that ostensibly is good for you, and then maybe 10 years later, it's like, "Oh, wait, that was bad," right? Like baby powder. I remember all this kind of stuff
talcum
has
powder
implications.
Yeah, now Johnson & Johnson is facing multi-billion-dollar lawsuit or whatever that is.
Right. So, I mean, again, you name the situation. I think part of the reason we're doing the show, protected speech, is I think we both want freedom of expression, freedom of speech, even if you disagree with it. Listen, I don't agree with what half the people say on Twitter, but it's okay. Let them say it. and you can ignore them or you can retort. You have that ability to do that. I mean, but
And
here
correct
we
me if
are in
I'm
the
wrong, this
situation once again.
Indian American doctor wasn't saying that his way or his research was the only way, right? I mean, I think that's the point here, that on Twitter at one point, pre-Musk, even if you questioned it or disagreed with it, you got shadow banned or, you got canceled. And that's stunning that this was happening, in the world's town square on Twitter.
Again, well-meaning people who clearly went over the line. I mean, shadow banning. I'm going to be fascinated to go through the data of actually who was shadow banned, why they were shadow banned, on what accounts. Listen, there's some people who clearly crossed the line, but I can't imagine a professor at Stanford, as pedigreed as Jay Bhattacharya, why he would be siloed in this way. This is going to be a fascinating story to uncover. Let's move forward now into more stories that you're doing up in the Northwest. Give us this exclusive story you've just broken in Seattle.
Yeah, it's a big story out here. Look, almost every major American city deals with graffiti, right? Graffiti vandals. But here, especially in Seattle, the new mayor, Bruce Harrell, when he, came into office about a year ago, he made a commitment to really deal with urban blight, urban decay. And part of that was not only addressing homeless encampments that were popping up everywhere, it was really this graffiti that was allowed just to flourish. And, graffiti or a mural, but actually what that does is it takes away and hurts a lot of small businesses that have to spend thousands of dollars cleaning or repainting. And depending on where you stand on this debate, either way, the mayor made a commitment declaring war on graffiti. And today, the Seattle Police Department arrested arguably two of the most prolific taggers in the city, and they used the tag eager, either EAGR or EAGER, and it's been just sprayed and tagged all over the city. So this is a pretty significant story. One of the guys, Casey Kane, believed to be the Eager, he admitted to putting the spray paint up on a mural and also having one of the Eager tattoos on his body. And the other guy, Jose Bethencourt, he was wanted as well on a $750,000 warrant for, domestic violence, abuse, and robbery. So again, these characters, have backgrounds. Kane also with a criminal history as well, a conviction for robbery. They're not just graffiti vandals. I mean, they have criminal history, so they're going to be potentially behind bars if a judge and the prosecutors follow through with this. But it's a big win for the city for sure.
It's interesting. This story reminds me of one you did a few weeks ago, where I think there was a community effort to clean up the tagging, and then almost immediately you had taggers destroy all that hard work. Are these folks just notorious in that region? They just were finally caught after years of destroying the place?
Yeah, I think we really saw an explosion here in Seattle in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, right? With the lockdowns, nobody was around, nobody was in the streets, and the cities just became their canvas and their murals, and became a free for all to the point where some of these brazen vandals were tagging police vehicles with tags. So it just got really out of control, and this Mayor Harrell, really declaring war on the graffiti vandals. They decided to punch back to the point where they even started mocking the mayor and putting the mayor's name on some of these murals as well, and it just became out of control, this lawless culture. Obviously the defund the police movement not helping, not enough officers on the street to get these vandals. But again, a big break for police today, arresting these two fellas, two of the most prolific, they say, in the city. And on top of that, they have criminal histories, and one of them was wanted on a pretty serious felony warrant as well. So again, a big win for law enforcement, and it could be a big win for the city if they can keep these guys off the streets and doing something else. Bottom line, I mean, this is happening in major American cities. So unless a message is sent, an example is made, this could continue. So we'll see what happens.
And another story that you have on top of going on at what you call an economic war zone. Explain that.
Yeah, Seattle is so complicated. At least the downtown right now, right? It's like this tale of two downtown Seattles. on the surface, most of downtown, gorgeous, right? You've got the Christmas season, the lights just sparkling and shining. But then there's this one corridor that happens to be one of the most important gateways. We all know Pike Place Market. We've seen the images and the video of the, folks throwing fish and catching fish. And that's a gorgeous area near the waterfront. But there's this corridor, 3rd and Pike, and it is a drug den. It is a full-blown black market of stolen goods, and there's open-air drug use. And these small business owners there, the mom and pops, and I covered one recently, Turco's Last Stand. It's a newsstand, and the owner's just trying to survive. Again, what he calls an economic war zone. It's like the mom and pop shops can barely hang on, while the big box stores, can afford to do business in this climate. But again, the small guys are saying, Mayor, city officials, city council, we need your help. We need more officers out here. We need outreach to the homeless. We need outreach to the drug users. But it really is just incredible, and unfortunately, it's put a black eye on the city in many ways. I mean, this is happening in San Francisco as well, isn't it?
I mean, it's happening in almost every major city. I mean, that's the issue, and this is part of the reason why we had so many people thinking that the momentum was going to shift during the midterms. But we had this abortion debate, which I think also had a big impact on what we saw during the 2022 election. But no question, all these major cities have been impacted by COVID, and there's been a lack of enforcement, really deliberately, by for public safety, for public health reasons. But some of that is now getting pulled back. They're starting to do sweeps in San Francisco, in San Jose, and obviously you've been documenting this thing in Seattle, and we're starting to see this in other towns as well. But I mean, again, you and I have both been in Washington D.C. in the last few months, and there's still plenty of encampments in the nation's capital. So it's going to be an ongoing issue.
I wanted to ask you about this. Why do you think? And look, we've been in the mainstream media as well. We've had long careers. Now we can kind of take and share our hot takes on what's going on. But when it comes to the homeless crisis, why isn't it being covered more by mainstream media outlets, and especially national news outlets? I mean, you have homeless encampments in our nation's, it's 5 minutes from the White House, in our nation's capital.
Well, I think that answer is pretty obvious. Most of the journalists, again, you're talking about elite media, right? You just talked about network news. Do you think these folks who are
CBS, Fox, I mean, the list goes on and on.
I mean, these are folks that make good livings. These are folks that generally have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. They hang out with the royal family. They hang out with the 1%. I mean, the journalism industry has evolved from where, let's say, the muckrakers of the 60s and 70s and the pre-Watergate era. After Watergate, it became a pretty sexy profession to be in, especially in D.C., right? You wanted to be with the Washington Post or the New York Times and break stories and hang out with the elite. I think the real turning point was this White House Correspondents' Dinner, where everybody wanted to go there and then hobnob with random celebrities. And it became, like, they called it nerd prom. But I think it's a little bit worse than that because, as journalists, we're supposed to hold public officials to account. I don't believe we need to be buddy-buddy with them or should be buddy-buddy with them. But relationships are important. We both have relationships with political leaders, with sources. That's one aspect. But it does stun me how much of this is done so we can hang out in those elite circles. And I think that's what you're seeing with the network news folks. They don't want to go into the encampments, man. I mean, let's face it. You're the only guy that wants to go in there and get your hands dirty at your age. I mean, you're not a young man anymore.
It's a crisis, though. And
it is a crisis.
Stunning. It is sad that you have men and women. These are people's fathers, mothers, children, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters. Living on our street. These are America's slums. You hit it right on the head. This is the elite media. The mainstream media has become the elite media, and they don't want to deal with reality. And that's
for every Jonathan Choe that's willing to go up there and roll up his sleeves and talk to, drug users who are at the lowest point of their life, to talk to the homeless all over that city in Seattle and that whole region. For every one of you, there
So
are
LA,
100. There are 100 who would rather go to a cocktail party at the State Department. Okay, so that's the reality. Okay, and I know it in my position because half the time I'm interviewing people who have made it, quote unquote, made it, and then very rarely are we covering these other issues where people are struggling, right? And when we cover those issues, they don't nearly get highlighted. So you pretty much answered your own question. That's what's going on.
yeah, I just needed, a reminder. Sometimes I just look around, when I'm covering these stories in Seattle or San Francisco, LA, wherever I go, I'm like usually the only journalist or reporter on this particular beat. And yet it's impacting so many aspects of daily life, from people literally dying, overdosing from the fentanyl on the streets of Seattle. Record number of fentanyl overdose deaths in Seattle this past year. How is that not a national story? It is an epidemic. And people are like, really? Is that really happening in Seattle? I had no idea. Well, because so many people rely on mainstream media. Mainstream media is not covering it. And at the end of the day, when you're not covering this, this impacts public policy. This impacts our democracy.
Jonathan, we're sending all kinds of money to foreign governments, taxpayer money. We're doing all kinds of stuff as a society at the local level, the state level, the federal level. What kind of coverage are we really getting in our city politics now, countywide, statewide? Are you kidding me? During COVID, all these politicians were running and hiding from us. I couldn't get a straight answer even when I was 6 feet away.
COVID was the best thing that happened to any crooked or corrupt politician.
Absolutely.
They didn't have to show up to city council meetings in person. They could hide behind the Zoom screen. It's just unbelievable. And I feel like the journalism industry got hit, and I think journalists forgot how to be journalists, or need to now be reminded about their calling. We're supposed to be the fourth estate. We're supposed to be watchdogs. We're supposed to hold the powerful accountable. We're supposed to speak to power and speak truth to power, and it's just not happening, and it's become a free-for-all. I say this all the time now in Seattle. I feel like the politicians, the elected officials, have outgunned the journalists because they've hired the former journalists now, and all the
it's not just the public officials, corporations. It's like 10 or 20 to 1 PR people versus journalists. And how many journalists are willing to stick it out in their 20s and make 18 grand a year
and not make a living? Journalists don't want to ruffle the feathers because they want access journalism. That's what you're describing.
100%. I mean, look, we just had a big debate in San Jose. I hosted the mayoral debate a couple months ago, and the winner of the election, Matt Mahan, asked folks to participate on Zoom. You had in-person plus you had Zoom.
Yeah.
And basically the city council were trying to appoint 2 people to replace Mahan and another person that had moved on without having an election, because they said, hey, the election will be at $9 million per seat, which is a lot of money. But San Jose is the 10th largest city in America. They have a multi-billion-dollar budget. And if in order to represent the district, they have multiple districts, to have that community represented, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, San Jose has 1 million people. To have that district represented, you got to do at least a mail-in ballot election. And people were outraged that they thought about having an appointment. And what was interesting to watch that live is that the Democratic Party got up there and said, hey, let's have an appointment. Let's just get that done. And they were booed at this public hearing because even though a lot of people lean left and are supporting Democrats, they want the ability to vote in the election. And so, again, there is real pushback. But again, if guys like you and me don't get access and are being warded off, I mean, this is a big issue throughout the country.
Well, there you go. That's why we have this show called Protected Speech, so we can talk about these issues that are not being highlighted, and we can go in depth and also offer some, behind the scenes inside baseball in terms of the way journalists are feeling, the way they're thinking, and the way they're going about approaching stories. And again, the industry right now is at an inflection point. I feel like, we're losing the best of the best to, other industries, or they're just retiring, and we're left with all these young pups. And then give credit to any journalist who's staying with it right now, but I don't know what the future holds.
It's increasingly difficult. Again, you have a handful of companies that generate revenue, and all these online companies that make fractions of pennies. They're struggling. All these new
Business
media
models
companies,
need to be reinvented.
all of
There's
these new media companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't want to name names, but their valuations are basically what they raised, or maybe 2x. It's pathetic. As someone that has bootstrapped multiple media companies, let me tell you, it's not easy, but it's worth it in the end if you can do it. Let's move forward now to our weekly segment on monitoring what's going on in terms of hate crimes towards Asian Americans. It's sponsored by the California Public Library. It's a state of California initiative, and we're glad to be able to spotlight this every week. Unfortunately, another very tragic situation. This one took place in Austin, Texas, where a Sri Lankan man actually got out of his home, thought there was an intruder, called the police, and then he was actually shot and killed in front of his home, which is stunning to see this video now that we've had the body cam video released by the Austin police. And now, obviously, the police department's being sued by his family, but this poor guy lost his life in this fracas. And it just goes to show you, his name is Rajan Moonsingh. I mean, there he is with his own weapon. I think that's also part of the dynamic here, Jonathan, is that this guy came out, thought he heard an intruder, called the police, had his own weapon, and then he got cut down by gunfire himself.
Yeah, and obviously this is still under investigation, lawsuit pending if it hasn't been filed already by the family. But it seems like just a tragic case based on what I've read and what I've seen regarding some of the reporting right now is that this homeowner, came out with his rifle, said something, and pointed in the direction of police. And at least according to the surveillance camera, and thank God for the family, they had surveillance camera, showed that the officer just immediately getting out of the cruiser and shooting. And the family's now alleging that that their loved one was not given time to explain himself properly, and that the officer who shot multiple times just jumped the gun, so to speak, and didn't do the due diligence. And that's what's complicated. In fairness to law enforcement, you show up to a scene, and obviously you're trained to approach certain situations, but you've got to make these split-second decisions. It's either your life or another person's life. So if the officer interprets a threat right away, right, and you haven't distinguished that this homeowner is actually not an intruder or not a criminal and not trying to hurt the police, you've got to make that call. And in this case, it seems like wires were crossed.
Let's face it, the guy was out there with a large weapon. And I have no idea what was going through that officer's mind, but certainly you see a man with a large weapon outside, you're probably going to react. That's what's challenging, is that this guy was outside and he got capped himself. It's just hard to imagine.
And something I want to make very clear with these segments when we talk about Asian hate, right? Again, just to clarify, I think a lot of times think, hey, it's going to be a non-Asian person attacking an Asian person, or it's going to be some type of quote unquote hate crime. That isn't necessarily going to be the case with our segments here right now. In this case, it was a white officer who fired the weapon at I believe, a South Asian man, right? Do we know if he's Indian American?
He's Sri Lankan.
A Sri Lankan man. And he's a victim. He's a victim right now, and he's an Asian American, and he's no longer with us. And that's what this segment also highlights, that there are many Asian Americans who are becoming statistics or victims, and they're just not getting the coverage that they need. Something that I brought up, right? Because obviously now there are questions about law enforcement. Again, I'm not covering the story on the ground in that city right now, and I want to respect the investigation as well. But what I want to know, we just went through BLM, Black Lives Matter, for 2 years, and all these social justice protests, right? Where's the social justice protests for this man? Is it just too late? Or is this country just too tired? Or is it because he's the wrong race that, there are no social justice protests in this case? Because clearly there are a lot of questions being raised about the way law enforcement responded to this case.
Well, I think obviously his family is upset about this, but oftentimes you need a movement. You need a group of folks to get behind you. And how big is the Sri Lankan community in this country? It's minute, and so this poor
But
guy
where are
lost
the
his life.
allies? Where are the allies? Where's the social justice advocacy from other communities of color? That's what I'm asking right now.
I would imagine there is some outcry in Austin, but to the degree of what we
I'm not
saw
here.
with
Hey, you and
George
I are
Floyd, no.
real well read. We're scanning the headlines all the time. I don't know about any protests right now in Austin, Texas, over this case. Do you?
No, I don't know. I haven't heard any kind of overt outreach by the public. I'm sure there's
That's
some
the
kind of
double
vigil.
standard I feel like I want to call out right now. Okay, I'm not saying the police did anything wrong. It's still under investigation. I'm just saying, from a media scrutiny standpoint, I think if it was a black man at dying at the hands of a white police officer, this would be a national story.
I will say we did cover something really tragic, frankly, on one of our first episodes, if I'm not mistaken. This family, the Sikh family in the Central Valley, that they were all killed. They had a little baby girl, if you might remember that story from a few months ago,
I
in
do
Central
own
Valley,
like a truck
California.
rental company or something, right?
Right, right. The former employee just came in there, kidnapped them, and executed them. And there was widespread coverage nationally, as well as candlelight vigils on multiple days. That was a pretty horrific story. So I don't want to generalize. I just think this was a tough situation. That guy had a large weapon himself, and he got cut down by a
Yeah, but
police
even
officer.
that
We still
case,
don't have
this
all
is
the
my
details.
point, and let's debate this. Let's break it down. This involved a police officer being accused of misconduct. That case with that family did not involve a police officer. It was a Hispanic man, allegedly, who did this, who's now, facing, potential consequences here. So there's a difference. It's not the same. I'm talking about this is an officer involved shooting. A Asian man is dead at the hands of an officer. There's no outcry from BLM, any of these social justice movements that were up in everyone's face 2.5 years ago, especially if it involved a white officer. I'm just saying, we're here to debate and talk about, to me, what I
Yeah,
see a double standard, not only with the activist community, but also with the media. That's
I,
all.
I think the reality that we see day to day is that some stories get amplified, and oftentimes other stories don't. And this debate's also gone on. There was an anchorman in San Francisco that lost his job for fighting over this child who was, I believe, missing. It was a black girl that was missing, and he didn't think that story was getting amplified, and he got into a big argument in his newsroom. And shortly thereafter, he basically was asked to leave and never came back for
Frank Somerville, right, at
Frank,
KTVU,
Frank Somerville at
who
KTVU,
has
and he'd
a
been
black
there.
child of his own.
He has a black child of his own, and you talk about a guy who lost it all. He'd been an anchorman for like 2 decades, maybe 3 decades at that station, and had some own personal trauma, and it was kind of on a short leash with the station, but it gave him reason to get rid of him right then and there. So
You
again,
know what?
people do
It
try to
didn't fit
stand
the
up and say
narrative,
it four
man.
times.
It didn't fit the narrative. Mark my words right now. The next time we hear about a officer involved shooting, a white officer killing a black man, and there are questions and it's still under investigation, I guarantee you're going to hear something from the activist community who has every right to speak up and to protest. That's all I'm saying. When it comes to Asian Americans and victims in similar circumstances, we don't see it from our community. I simply want to say we don't have the voice. In many cases, shame on our community. But again, at some point, we've got to be consistent and we've got to start questioning and asking, where's the Asian American community on this? Why isn't the Asian American community mobilizing? I'm not blaming any other community right now, any other community of color. If it's an Asian American, in this case, Sri Lankan community, at the very least, the South Asian community. Where is everybody? That's all I'm asking.
Hey, it's a fair point, and I think we'll continue to monitor this particular situation and see if this thing evolves. But certainly a very tragic situation. This guy lost his life in this shooting. Jonathan, any final remarks here as we wrap up the program? I know we're always in the middle of all kinds of interesting controversies and having a debate about what to cover, because there's all the stuff that we didn't get to. Brittany Griner getting released, which was a big story. A lot of stuff going on in global affairs that we didn't get a chance to get
I think the
across.
story that Diya TV has been covering, that you've been covering a lot, again, the caste story that's happening, in these public and private institutions, and in these cities with large South Asian communities. I think that's a story that really needs to be amplified. You asked, I asked even my journalism colleagues who are not South Asians. They have no clue what I'm even talking about when I mention caste. They have no idea this is happening at these academic institutions. In my opinion, the fact that this is quietly happening, the fact that it's not getting the coverage, it could have unintended consequences down the line, and we don't even know what those are going to be.
Well, Rajiv Malhotra, who we did interview recently, wrote a book basically about this topic called Snakes in the Gunga. And he's kind of outlined how this thing has evolved over the last couple of decades, to the point where now there's a real effort to get laws changed. And there's significant money behind it, because some of these folks that are trying to get these laws changed are now also asking to be, going to tech companies to get training, to provide training and get paid, $50,000, $75,000, huge amounts of money to train people on what to look for in terms of caste. So it's actually big business as well.
Happening, and I have no doubt it is. Let's show the evidence. At the end of the day, show the paper trail, show the evidence, and let's talk about it then.
Right. Well, I think, again, largely most of this community has gone very quiet, under the radar, didn't want to get in trouble. So it is kind of surprising to say that this is a widespread issue, and I think that's where the data is going to be very, very important. In the Cal State University lawsuit that HAF, the Hindu American Foundation, has filed, as well as the Cisco case filed in Silicon Valley. Cisco denied any kind of claims of discrimination on the basis of caste, but that's going to be a huge situation. It's being obviously being brought up in all these other resolutions that are being passed around the country. And again, a lot of this happened during COVID, very quietly, where public meetings were not going on time and time again. A lot of the stuff was done on Zoom and back channel emails. So I think that's another aspect of this that we should comment on.
Yeah. And it's not only the caste debate. That's happened in so many other spaces, so many other industries. So
that's true. All right. For Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. That's been another edition of Protected Speech. We'll see you again next week.